Bratislava Cinema Board presents Bratislava in the Metamorphoses of Time.
On the third day after the battle, Alexander arrived at the bank of the Istros, the greatest river in Europe. It flows through most of the continent, separating belligerent tribes. They're mostly Celtic tribes, in whose lands the Istros has its source. We hereby allow our faithful subjects, freely and as they see fit, to own and hold boats on the river Danube in Bratislava, and freely to carry in the said boats people, animals, market goods, and any other things.
Istros, Danubius, Danube. The names of the river, whose waters, sometime proverbially blue, reflect the city that has grown on both its banks. Posonium, Pressburg, Poznan, Prešporok, Bratislava. Those are the stages of the city's growth and maturing. Few places have such a varied and contradictory history. The pictures of familiar and lost nooks and crannies of the city are not intended as an exercise in the nostalgia of former glory. Yet one cannot help feeling sentimental when looking at archive shots and yellowed photographs. For instance, a tram leaving for Vienna. That was the Bratislava of our grandfathers. The Danube and the castle, with the bricks well laid, as a folk song says. Neither the city's skyline nor its history would be complete without the castle. It was on this hill that Bratislava's birth certificate was written. Who was the first to till this land? Who was the first to understand that this was the right place to stop on the journey across Europe? A proud and unyielding Roman legionary, or a hot-headed Celtic blacksmith? Or someone else still, long before them? This is where, according to the Romans, the limits of the cultural frontier of old Europe were found. Rome's conquering zeal stopped here, and it was from here that Europe was addressed by the spoken and written word and by magnificent Slavonic liturgy.
The elder brother left regions Olympian. The younger from Byzantium did come. A noble seed they brought to our land for it to give a rich harvest, to spread and grow in the country, ring in mouths and at assemblies. Unlettered nations would be done. Speak ye Slavs. And so it was. We fully approve the Slavonic alphabet devised by the late Constantine the philosopher, which should be used for singing the praises of God. We hereby order this language to be used for praising God and his deeds.
Have their destinies too. The Roman foundations have weathered and worn away, so have Celtic ovens, and the houses of the ancient Slavs have turned to dust. But the books have remained. The parchment and paper have withstood the ravages of time to tell the story of human joys, worries, and work, all the doings that have accompanied the family of man from time immemorial. It is not a story of the depths of spirit alone, but also of paltry quibbling, cowardice and aggressiveness when property, dowries and inheritance, wealth or fame were at stake. The world of these books differs from the eternal and celestial one. Long before us, people had a healthy sense of everyday experience and the problems of the day. Municipal management books, accounts, credit and debit. The guild books show the craftsman's pride of the guild and their membership in it. There are also documents of extraordinary favour here, royal privileges that mark the stages of the city's history and anniversaries. That is true of a charter issued by King Andrew III, 700 years old. It says, among other things,
"Let the citizens elect from among their midst a praetor or chief magistrate for a 12-month term, so that he, together with 12 of his fellow citizens, can deal with all disputes that may arise among the citizens or with strangers." Should anybody wish to move from any place to Bratislava, no one is to stop them, lord of the manor or town included. We decree that no payment be demanded from those who move to this city from any place, or from those that pass through. We grant all traders with cloth, cattle and fish who come to the city from any town or kingdom the right to enter freely and safely to exhibit their goods for sale.
Good order is the foundation of peace. Sticking to that sound principle, King Sigismund confirmed the ancient privileges and added new ones in gold and white. The city was given the right to use a coat of arms and to use red wax for sealing its papers. The Golden Bull of King Matthias Corvin is another of the many royal charters granted to the city. The value of the gold seal was outweighed by the decision to found a university in Bratislava, the Academia Istropolitana.
Desirous of science and scholarship being fostered with all diligence to give strength to faith, we grant permission for a university to be founded in a city or town in this our kingdom that will be deemed the most suitable for that end, with all the faculties, and a chancellor, and with the necessary incomes for those that will teach there.
Advanced spiritual life flourished in the city, reflecting the varied contacts and close ties of the patricians to the European name. The picture of the city was marked by the churches and monasteries or cloisters of Franciscans, Ursulines, nuns of the Order of St. Clare, and Capuchins. A magnificent Gothic cathedral was built on the foundations of St. Saviour's, a centre of spiritual culture and a dominating point in the city skyline. Steadfastness, song, ethics, and beauty, the reverse of the hustle and bustle of worldly life, filled this space with humility and devotion. Render unto God the things that are God's, and unto man what elevates him above the smallness of life and praises his name after his death. Many great men, Palfy, Pasmagne, Schomberg, Kerman, Beizer, and others, bequeathed the city not only money, but also their bodily remains. This was the scene of baptisms, oaths, and graduations. Here prayers could be heard for the saving of souls and the city itself at times when the Black Death or foreign troops stood at the city gates. The prayers of the burghers, it must have been, that brought Bratislava 300 years of prosperity when it became the capital of Hungary, and St. Martin's Cathedral, the Hungarian Coronation Church. The cathedral became famous for its coronations. 19 times the bells pealed and hymns were sung in praise of rulers who were crowned here. The greatest coronation of them all was that of Empress Maria Theresa. The valley between Hainburg and Bratislava. In a magnificent marquee, the Archbishop made a speech of welcome. The area outside St. Martin's Cathedral. The Queen-to-be, with her suite, entered the south gate of the cathedral. This is where the most important part of the coronation took place. After the coronation, the procession slowly moved along the narrow streets to the town hall square. Here, the Queen bowed to the statue of her patron saint, Our Lady Victorious. In the nearby Franciscan church, she dubbed 45 noblemen Knights of the Golden Stirrup. In front of the Samaritans' church beyond the city wall, the Queen took the oath by laying her hand on a cross. The procession moved to the coronation hill on the bank of the Danube. The Queen received her crown and power. The people got wine and games. The magnificent coronation spectacular took place 250 years ago, and variations of it have been enacted to this very day. People have fun and they reminisce. The space in front of the town hall, the medieval main square, this was the seat of power at the time of Jacob the magistrate and those that followed him.
The first of all the city houses is the town hall or the municipal praetorium. The space under the tower clock is guarded day and night by buglers, guards and sentries. The lower part of the tower is taken up by a gangway with the archives. Next to the archives is the town hall itself, where the city council usually meets, administers justice and manages the city business. Everything to be seen there is magnificent to an extent that inspires awe.
Matthew Bell wrote in the mid-18th century. By the 15th century, thanks to the privileges and the wise policy of the city fathers, Bratislava had everything a medieval city needed. Firm city walls of stone, spiritual and commercial life, trade, handicrafts, monasteries, hospitals and pharmacies, 2 of them near the town hall. There must have been a good reason for that. The Saviour Pharmacy, the inheritor of a great tradition in pharmacy.
We, Euralipai, announce to whomever it may concern that we have at our own expense established a pharmacy which we have presented to the Society of Jesus. The said college hereby undertakes to supply us with medicines from the said pharmacy till the end of our days.
Whatever the complaint, there was a universal medicine in Bratislava, wine. The good people of the city preferred it to any medicine. There was a fine winemaking tradition. There were books on viniculture, and from the ancient Slavs, grapes on jewels and decorations. There were vineyard guards and songs about wine.
Chlapci, pijme víno, však Morava teče mimo. Až sa vínka napijeme, vodičku sa umijeme. Kapucíni, františkáni, rádi kážu o pokáni, aby sme sa neopili, len sa vždycky modlívali.
I undertake to be a just and faithful manager in an honest community, in buying wine, to tend it and protect it. to sell wine in good measure and justly to the local taverners. So help me God, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and all the saints.
Bratislava has always been very much a student's city too. Not all the saints could help a student who was caught in a tavern, though. The rules were strict.
Let them, under pain of public punishment and disgraceful expulsion, avoid drink, banqueting, dance, visits to suspicious places, ball games, and other light-heartedness unworthy of a student, as well as public taverns and inns, bathing in the Danube and robbing vineyards and gardens.
Signed, Rector of the Evangelical Lyceum, Matthew Bell. Besides his students and the Lyceum, he was kept busy by his history of Hungary and the city of Bratislava. Another centre of education was the General Seminary at Bratislava Castle. The foundations of the first grammar of the Slovak language were laid here thanks to the enlightened reforms of Emperor Joseph II and the determined work of the theological students headed by Anton Bernoulak. Some years later, the work of these men was continued by another student centre, the Evangelical Lyceum, headed by Ludovic Stur.
We can only fully build our life, and are going to do so, in our own dialect, because that is indeed closest to us. It is the language we can best understand. We have worked solely for the Slovak people, and in taking this step, have had only them in mind.
This piece of stone is also part of the history of Bratislava. Neither the stone nor the symbol carved in it were able to withstand the onslaught of time. It was a boat of vain illusion that came to Bratislava on the Danube. Charles Habsburg, the last Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary, with his wife and his 7-year-old son Otto, came here to placate his nations. The last visit, the last farewell. The swan song of the dual monarchy sailed away up the Danube. A new chapter of our history had started. An important part of that chapter was written by this man, Milan Rastislav Stefanik, a legend of our history. It was his fate not to return to the city of his student days alive.
Stefanik had faith in our national cause. His faith convinced everybody around him. He paved the way to the highest political and military circles for me and Beneš. A Slovak, a Moravian, and a Czech headed the work abroad that brought us freedom and independence.
Those were the words of the first president of Czechoslovakia, Thomas Garrigue Masaryk. His visit to the castle of Bratislava was but short. Like Napoleon and Tsar Peter the Great before him, he was interested in Petržalka, the opposite bank of the Danube. What was the subject of the conversation? Who knows? Petržalka used to be no more than a wild jungle, a foreground of the city. It was especially popular among soldiers. The Romans were among the first, the men who guarded the northern frontier of the empire at the advanced outpost of Gerolate.
Remember, thou man of Rome, what your art and science is to be. You are to rule nations by force, bringing peace wherever you set your foot. Spare those that surrender, but by force of arms, crush rebellious tribes.
That was the kind of creed that all those that came here armed to the teeth seemed to embrace. Tartars, Turks, Germans, Russians, Frenchmen. Napoleon stopped here twice. The second time probably to see how the peace treaty his delegates had signed in the city on the other bank was being kept. After the last commands had died down and the dust had settled, Petržalka was again taken over by picnickers and holidaymakers. The company here was varied. You could hear many languages: German, Slovak, Hungarian, but also Croatian, Hebrew, Italian or Greek. An idiosyncratic polyphony of the languages and dialects of a multinational society, where people usually also spoke the other's language or languages.
When the weather coincides with the intentions of the goddess Pomona, the harvest is rich. That is the time when family gatherings take place here. Smoke rises from campfires, and autumn feasts are held in the open air. Not really sumptuous, but agreeable. Let this pleasant retreat be maintained to the city forever.
Nothing lasts forever. With almost relentless regularity, the water of the Danube joined Petržalka and the city in one tragic hole in the early spring, the time of the thaw. Layers of fertile soil remained, sadness and hope that better days would come again. The foot of Castle Hill was a neuralgic centre of the city, no man's land and everyman's. The place where the power of the castle and the municipality clashed and ended. A motley society settled here over the centuries, crafts and tradesmen. Names like Zuckermandel, Schlossgrund, Vidrica hardly mean anything to many people in Bratislava today. They have no palpable connotations. Fish Square, exposed to the pressure of immigrants and to the waves of the Danube. This is where the rights of the city population ended, until quite recently, in terms of a share in deciding about public affairs. Only ruins have remained of the multinational cultures that had developed here. That is particularly true of German and Jewish cultures. The little that's remained of the original settlement illustrates the well-known principle, If you like, switch on your imagination. The idiosyncratic culture of the Jewish community also partly settled at the foot of Castle Hill and had one major figure, the learned rabbi Khatam Sofer.
This house is a sanctuary of sanctity. The dust of the lawgiver rests here, the crown of the beauty of Pressburg and the splendor of its generations.
The fiery hand of fate smote this part of Bratislava repeatedly. Luckily, there were other hands too, the hands of master craftsmen, artists, sculptors and painters, able to give new life to the past and to evoke memories. Bratislava has kept the credit of a centre of culture. Great musicians have stayed here, even if for a short time. Liszt, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Hummel, Rubinstein. Distinguished sculptors, Donner and Messerschmitt, fascinated by the potential of the human mimicry. Many natives of Bratislava left their city at a tender age to return to it later as respected men. The sculptor Victor Tildner was a case in point.
It matters to me greatly that my native city should know my work as well as possible. The expressions of favor and kindness have encouraged me to make a humble offer, to put all my work at the disposal of my native city as a token of deep gratitude.
There was another native of Bratislava who had a similar relationship to his city, the composer Johann Nepomuk Hummel. These rooms, proudly and decoratively enclosed, indicate the presence of distinguished guests. It was here another famous native of Bratislava, the designer and inventor Kempelen, may have demonstrated his automatic chess machine. It is far from certain. One thing is certain, though. Music was played here, and the quiet conversation was of politics, business, women, fashion, much as it now is of the works of art exhibited here. On the pavement outside the windows of these palaces, carriages rumbled along, and rich robes cut according to Viennese fashions rustled excitingly. The shouts of hawkers and tradesmen from the nearby marketplace could faintly be heard. Loud haggling mingled with the sweet smell of perfume, cinnamon, and thyme. The ravages of time damage even the firmest of walls and cover even the most splendid statues or paintings with dust. The city needs restoring and renewing. New inhabitants move to Bratislava, bringing with them new hopes and desires and new ways.
Don't wait for me, my girl, even if you're in love. It's a habit we may manage to break again. A man 30 years younger will come. Your heart will take him. He will be good for you.
Potom ti nahradí, čo nedá ti už môj.
He will make good what my sorrow could not give you. And I'll only say, what a lovely couple. Don't wait for me, my girl, even if you are in love. Smilingly we met, and smilingly we'll part again.
Aj sa rozídeme.
The modern history of the city is closely tied to this place. Here, history marched with firm revolutionary steps. How often the place changed its name. St. Lawrence Moat, Florian, Hlinka, and Stalin Square. The green, corn, and bread market. Here, virtually everything was bought and sold, goods and illusions. What was seen as an obstacle had to give way to bold, magnificent town planning. The old medieval toll gate was opened wide.
There are about 5 streets leading to the north. The most important of them is called after the 4 tanks of the public well, now dried up. It is always very busy, never without pedestrians. The first of all the streets is St. Michael's Street, called after the gate by which it is entered. It has rows of houses on both sides. Outstanding among them, on the right, are the Chibai, Segner, Jassenach palaces and the Royal Treasury. The eastern side of the suburb in front of St. Michael's Gate branches into a number of streets, Hungarian Street being the most important one. The Germans call it Schöndorfer Gasse. It used to be shorter and less densely populated.
Indeed, all the streets have grown longer as time passed. Spitalska Street, for instance. Here, hospitals rubbed shoulders with churches and military barracks, and with small craftsmen's houses in between. That's what Bratislava has been like in the metamorphoses of time. That is how the city's face has changed, molded by the needs, functions and laws of power. Periods of prosperity alternated with stagnation and decline. As the living organism it is, the city has overcome many an illness. Many injuries made by unwise interventions have healed, but ugly wounds have remained. One thing cannot be denied. This is a city that's been a meeting place of all the cultures that have ever set this part of Europe moving. It is the regional context that seems to have produced that typical combination of languages, character and interests of Central European ethnic units. That is the source of the hope that Bratislava will continue the tradition of the best and most significant moments of its history. Advisors, dramaturg. Film editor, sound engineer, music. Production manager, camera. Written and directed by. Thanks to produced for the Bratislava Cinema Board by Aleph Studio, Slovak film production, Bratislava 1990.